Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Montague here, and in this video we are going to cover the final project for Unit 4, Variables, Conditionals, and Functions, and this is your Decision Maker app. So if we're here on Unit 4, we scroll all the way down to Lesson 12, and this is where you will be completing your Decision Maker project. So I'm actually going to split this video for this decision maker project into 3 separate videos. So for this first part, we are going to go over the requirements for the project, look at a few sample apps, and then I will be walking us through a few different questions and creating flowcharts for those. The next part of the video, section 2, we're going to look at designing the user interface, and then the third part of the video, we are going to actually do the coding for this app. So let's jump right into it to start off looking at these sample apps. So in Bubble 1 and 2, for Lesson 12, we have 2 sample apps that we can look at. The first one here on Bubble 1 is Where Should I Eat? So this one is giving us recommendations on which restaurants we should eat at based on our inputs. So we have the inputs for our name. So I'm going to put in Mrs. Montague. We can select what type of food we would like to eat. So we've got Chinese, Italian, and breakfast to choose from. And we can also select how many dollars per person we would like to spend. So for this particular one, of course, it asks what the app is doing. It's giving us restaurant recommendations. The expected user of this app, I would say, is somebody who would like to eat out at a restaurant and isn't sure where to go. The inputs, we can input our name, the type of restaurant we want to eat at, and the dollars per person we would like to spend. The output is going to be the actual recommendation of the restaurant. And a function could be used in this app, probably in the instance of checking the conditional statement. So we're checking what type of restaurant and how many dollars per person we want to spend. And then it is giving us a recommendation based off of that. So a function would be an update screen function called in each of our on events for this one, is what I would say. All right, so you can change the dollars per person that you want to spend. What I like about this app is that it shows you your inputs. So it says, hello, whatever I input as my name. It sounds like you want to eat at an Italian restaurant and spend $20 per person, and then they give me the recommendation. So I really like that format because it verifies what I've selected to make sure, like maybe I made a mistake. I actually wanted to spend $35 per person, not $20 per person. And we can see initially it said Bizarros. Once I hit over $30 per person for Italian, it said Casina Spinace would be the recommended restaurant. Okay, so the recommendations are going to change based on what type of restaurant you select and how many dollars per person you have selected. So that is that one. Let's go ahead and look at number 2, Bubble 2, really quick. All right, and this one is an activity finder app. So for this one, it works somewhat similarly, where we have our name that we can input. So that's one of our inputs is our name. We can also select the time of day and the activity level that we would like to do, and then it's going to tell us what type of activity we should do. So in my default, once I put my name in, it already updated the screen to give me a recommendation. So it's saying, hi, my name. Again, I like that this one confirms what selections I've made. So it's telling me that I want to do a light activity at 8 o'clock. And then it says I might want to try walking around the mall if that's what my selections were. All right, so I can change. If I say 4 p.m., it says I might want to try flying a kite at Manson Park. If I change it to moderate exercise level, right, it says it's moderate exercise at 4 p.m. I might want to try biking on the boardwalk. If I change it to the morning, it says try swimming at the indoor swimming pool. So it's going to give me all these basic recommendations for what activity I should do based on what type of activity level I want. So if I want something more challenging or easier, and what time of day it is. So again, The function is probably going to be something that contains our conditional statement and our update screen, set properties, things like that, that will be called in our on events for this one. So once we get to the coding portion of the sample app I'll be putting together for this series of videos, you'll see what I mean by putting all of our conditional statements and set properties into a function and then calling that function. We'll get there eventually. All right, next we are going to look at the project planning guide for the Decision Maker app. So this is the Unit 4 Decision Maker app, and this is the project guide, or the planning guide rather, that code.org provides us. So this one, you are just making an app that helps a user make a decision. So you basically are going to be taking inputs and then providing outputs based on what the user has inputted for this app. And it can be any kind of decision that you want it to be. You just have to make sure that you get all these requirements met. So you're going to be submitting your final app in your completed project planning guide. Your requirements for this one are pretty extensive. So you need to have at least one number and one string used to make and report a decision with a conditional statement. So that means that as the user of your app, I would need to be able to put in a number input, and I would need to be able to put in a string input, and then my decision would be made based on those inputs. You need a function which updates the screen and is called at least twice in the program. You will need a conditional statement that includes at least one logical operator. So you're going to be using and, or not in your statements. You need to have at least 3 possible output answers. So they give the example of the can we adopt a cat or not that we've looked at in the past. So their example says, yes, you can adopt a cat would be one. It's a long bell. Yes, you can adopt a cat would be one possible output. No, you can't adopt a cat would be our second possible output. And then congratulations, you can adopt a kitten is the third possible output in that scenario. Every function has to contain a comment explaining the purpose and functionality, and you need clear and easy to navigate user interface and clean code with no bugs or errors. All right, so it walks you through the steps of this. So if you read through these planning guides code.org provides, you can pretty much figure the project out. But we'll go through it together for the first little bit here. All right, so first, I expect my students to brainstorm app ideas. I make my students come up with at least 3 ideas and then get feedback from their classmates on what their best idea is. So you come up with 3 ideas, narrow it down to the topic you are going to actually create your app about. So once you've chosen your topic, you survey your classmates to determine what information that you might need to make an informed decision. So that would be things like, for example, if I was going to use the can I adopt a cat or not question. So what would be the requirements? Like, how much money do I need to be able to adopt this cat? How old do I need to be in order to adopt a cat? And then what would be the requirements for adopting a kitten? Do I have to have more money to get a kitten? Do I need to have a higher age because kittens require more care? So we would want to determine what variables we need to store the information for our app, and then you record those variables here. For this app, you also might need a variable for your actual recommendation or what the decision is at the end of the app. Depending on how you set it up, you might not use a variable for that, or you might. It just depends. Then the next step, once you've determined the pieces of information that you need, you want to create your flowchart. So again, they give us the example of can we adopt a cat, this first flowchart that we saw where it was checking our age if it was greater than 14. Then it checks our money if we have $40 and determining if we can or cannot adopt a cat. All right. Then on the next page here, it just gives you the components of the flowchart and some space for you to create your own flowchart if you so choose. So this is what I'm talking about when we need to do some planning for this, right? If I'm just like winging it I can't just like create an app if I don't know what type of input I need and if I don't know what those outputs are going to be. So I need to kind of plan what that's going to be with my variables and then my conditional statements in my flowchart to actually determine what specifically the user is going to be seeing. So the next part of this video, I'm going to just use 5 sample questions, 5 sample decisions that need to be made, and I'm going to draw out or sketch out some flow charts for you to look at. So without further ado, let's get into that. All right, so for the first question we are going to cover with an example flowchart is what type of shoes should I buy? And I apologize in advance for my handwriting sometimes. This is not the most conducive for me to write with a stylus, but we'll try it. I'll be talking through the whole thing, so you'll get it anyway. All right, so what type of shoes should I buy? All right, the first thing that we need to do in order to figure out our flowchart for this is to determine what variables we're going to need. So the first thing I really want to know, if I'm going to recommend shoes for somebody to buy, is what do they need these shoes for, right? What type of event are they going to, or what activity are they going to be doing in these shoes? All right, for me to recommend something that makes sense. All right, so we could do activity as part of our variable for this, right? What activity am I going to do? I would also want to know what the price point we're looking at are, right? Because shoes can be pretty cheap, but shoes can also be very expensive depending on what we're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to go with activity and price as my 2 variables. Again, you might also have a recommendation variable, but you might not, just depending on how you set your code up. So totally up to you on how you make that work. But I'm going to be using a recommendation variable. Sorry for the bell. As we go through writing this, I'm actually not really doing flowcharts. I'm basically going to just be writing out conditional statements in like a kind of pseudocode. So you're going to see basically exactly what this should look like in your code if you were to write this. So our conditional statements, of course, always start with an if, right? Because we are checking if various conditions are met to determine what happens. All right, so we need to account for what type of activity we're doing as well as what our price point is. So for my first tier of this conditional statement, I would do something like if my activity is equal to, let's say, formal event. Maybe I'm like going to a wedding or something, so I need some nice shoes to wear with a dress. So if my activity is equal to a formal event, right, and, right, one of the requirements for this is to have an and or a not statement. Okay, so I'm using and. This is what my and symbol looks like when I write it out. That's an and. Okay, so if my activity is equal to a formal event and my price, let's say, is less than or equal to 60, so $60. All right, then I'm going to make a recommendation for you to get flats. All right, so that's what's going to actually display as the decision. I'm recommending you get flats because flats are usually cheaper. And I'm approaching this question like I'm talking to women, picking out women's shoes. So sorry, boys, we're just focusing on women's shoes for this because that's what I'm more familiar with. All right, so if our activity is a formal event and our price is less than or equal to $60, then we're going to recommend flats. However, we're going to have an if-else next because we need to make some more specifications here. All right, so if our activity, we're going to do the same thing. Oh, and we need the double equal to. If our activity is equal to a formal event, okay, and this time let's say our price is greater than $60, then, oh gosh, what the heck did it just do to that? That doesn't look like anything that should have happened. We'll just leave it like that. Hopefully it doesn't make that look all weird again. All right, so if our activity is a formal event and our price is greater than $60, this time it will let me write again. I don't want to select. I would like to write with my writing tool, please. Okay, then our recommendation is going to be, let's say, heels for this. That was not English. Our recommendation is going to be heels, all right, because those are typically more expensive than flats are, but they're still fancy shoes, all right? So if we're going to a formal event and we don't have a big budget, we're going to get flats, otherwise we're going to get heels. All right, then we need to account for some other activity types, okay? So we're going to have another if-else. All right, so on this tier, we're now going to say if our activity is equal to, let's say, sports. We're looking for shoes we can wear to play sports. And again, our price is going to be less than or equal to 60. All right, I'm using 60 as a cutoff because to me it seems like you can get like okay, kind of lower quality shoes for less than $60. But if you're looking on getting fancier shoes, very specific name brand shoes, usually it's going to be more than $60 for a pair of shoes. So it just kind of depends, but that's going to be my cutoff point throughout this. All right, so if we're looking for activity to be sports and our price is 60, then our recommendation recommendation is going to be, I would put like off-brand tennis shoes. Or I might name like some specific brands that I know are cheap, right? But we're just looking for like some regular run-of-the-mill tennis shoes. We can do basic sports if we don't have a lot of money to spend in some basic tennis shoes. We don't need anything that fancy. All right, but let's say if our activity is sports is equal to sports and our price is greater than 60, then I would recommend, let's say, name brand sport specific shoes. All right, because I can get like, if I'm looking for running shoes, let's say, if I want cheap running shoes, I can just get any old tennis shoes. I can run in them just fine. But if I'm a serious runner and I'm looking for something a little bit more specific, things that are going to help me run like faster, I'm probably going to want to get some expensive like shoes that are actually designed for running. So that's why I'm going to recommend the name brands. Like I can get Nike running shoes or Adidas running shoes that are going to be a lot more ergonomic and whatever for running. Okay. Then I would have a couple more tiers on this if it was me. Okay, so I would do another if else. All right, and this time if our activity, let's say, is equal to everyday wear. All right, and my price is less than or equal to 60. Then my recommendation, I'm just doing REC as an abbreviation, my recommendation is going to be off-brand, again, off-brand tennis shoes, flats, or sandals, right? Because you can get some sandals pretty cheap. You can get some flats pretty cheap. And then if else, if my activity is equal to, again, everyday wear, and my price, my handwriting just gets worse and worse the further I go down this. Okay, and my price is greater than 60, then my recommendation might be name brand tennis shoes like my fancy school color Nikes I wear that were $80. Okay, name brand tennis shoes. I would say like something like Teaks because they're very expensive flats, or fashion sandals because you can get some pretty expensive sandals if they're fancy ones. All right. So that would be my recommendation. You could also potentially do like an else at this. So maybe none of these things actually evaluated as true because we have and statements throughout all of this. So like if both of these things were true, then we'd get the output. But if only one of them is true, we don't get that output. So let's say that we didn't, select any of these activities, or we put in something really like strange for our price, right? We might have an else that's like, a default statement that says, sorry, I can't help select your shoes. Okay, and that would just be for the instance where they had some really kind of input, some really weird kind of input, and we just didn't have a recommendation for them. Okay, so this would be basically what your conditional statement would look like for your app. So it meets the requirements because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential outputs, and you also are using the and statements as part of your Boolean expressions. Okay, so this would cover what you would need for your conditional statement. So let's look at another sample and do a little pseudocode flow charting, whatever you want to call it, for this one. So our next option, our next question rather, is going to be what kind of cat should I adopt? All right, so that's my question. For my variables that I need for this one, all right, the main thing I would be concerned about, sorry for the bell, the main thing I would be concerned about for answering this question, would be, good gravy, go away, would be what the cat's temperament is, right? I want to make sure I'm getting a cat that fits into my household. Why do you do that sometimes? Why does it make my writing look so off when it does like the auto-corrected wording? That looks horrible. I don't know. I guess that's just going to be what it's going to be. Okay. And I made a big dash down there. Sorry, having technical difficulties. Okay, so if my cat's temperament, right, it could be a snuggly cat, it could be a playful cat, it could be a very vocal cat, it could be a ferocious cat. So it just kind of depends on what kind of temperament we're looking for. I would also want a variable for price point on this one, which might sound kind of weird, but I can go to like the Humane Society and just adopt a cat for pretty dang cheap. But if I'm looking to adopt like a purebred Persian cat, for instance, that cat's going to be a whole heck of a lot more expensive. So the price will matter depending on what type of cat we're looking to adopt. And then the last thing I might want, this one also might kind of sound weird, but hair. Let's specify what kind of hair we want. Because if I want a long-haired cat, I need to recognize I'm going to be grooming that cat daily. If I want something that's a little bit less maintenance, I might get a short hair cat. Or I might be looking for a cat that doesn't shed and isn't going to leave its fur all over the place. And then I might look into something like a hairless cat. So I'm going to specify what type of hair the cat has as one of the things we're looking at. All right. So let's start with our if at the very top. And I'm going to start with hair. Ooh, hair. I can't spell. Let's undo that. Undo the hair. Can you please undo the word hair that I just wrote? This thing is driving me up a wall. Good gravy. Okay. All right, so if our hair let's say, is equal to hairless. And the temperament is equal to, let's say, playful. And lastly, if our price is greater than $250, then our recommendation is going to be to adopt what's called a Peterbald, because those are very playful hairless cats that are also purebred and very expensive. I don't think you can get hairless cats at all, period, that are going to be cheap. All right, so that would be our recommendation for that. We might do a couple more lines for this one where, this is going to be an if-else for our next one. So we might stick with hairless. Okay, you might try a statement that has a different kind of temperament. Okay, but for this particular example, I'm not going to obviously show you like all of the options that I would program into this app just for the sake of time. But if we did another line of hairless with, let's say, the same temperament, I'm just going to put quotation marks to say we're doing the same thing, but this time with our price being less than $250, then the recommendation might be something like, sorry, you can't afford a hairless cat. Because, yeah, you're not going to find a hairless cat for less than $250 unless somebody's just, like, trying to adopt it out or something, and they're not trying to make a profit. All right, so that would be our recommendation there. All right, then we would have more lines, and you can kind of get the drift of this, right? It's just if-else statements all the way down the line. Ooh, let's get rid of that big line there really quick. It will let me backspace it. Okay, so then we might have if-else. Okay, we're going to this time say if our hair is a short-haired cat. Okay, and temperament is whatever. Honestly, it doesn't so much matter what the temperament is. If I'm going to get a short-haired cat, its temperament is equal to something, right? I'm not going to really specify this. All right, and then we say our price, again, is, let's say less than $250, yeah. Okay, and then our recommendation might be to adopt like a tabby cat, because you can get a tabby cat from the Humane Society pretty cheap, and you can pick one that suits your preferences as far as their temperament goes. Okay, so that could be the option there, right? And then we'd have some more if-elses, right? For hair, you might have a couple options for hair being short hair, a couple options for hair being long-haired cats, all right, etc., etc. And then again, at the end of it, if I can stop drawing random lines, you might want to have just a final else statement that says, sorry, not sure what type of cat you should adopt, right? If none of these previous conditions are met. If I was doing this as an actual app, my conditional statement here is probably going to be, 8, 9, 10 plus tiers. Because I personally love cats, I would have a lot of specifications that we could potentially make about what type of cat we want to get. So there would be a lot of different options. You might choose to do less than that, right? You only need 3 potential outputs, so up to you how you would want to handle that. But that's an example of the beginning, at least, of a conditional statement for this question. I'm just kind of trying to move these along so we're not here for 87 years going over these different statements. All right, so our third question is going to be What video game should I play? All right, so we need to specify some variables for that. All right, so one of my variables might be type, as far as like what type of game we're playing. All right, because we have first-person shooters, there's Metroidvanias, there's puzzle games, there's story games. So what type of game you're interested in playing is going to make a difference. I'm going to say price, again, matters for this one. You might see this price a lot because it matters for quite a few questions. So the price is going to make a difference, right? Because I can get a pretty cheap game if I'm looking for just a casual game. Usually fancy games are $60 or more, and then cheaper games are less than that, so I might have a price point in there. I might also just have like a multiplayer for this. So like sometimes me and Mr. Decker are looking for couch co-op games, and we're not interested in anything that's not multiplayer. So that could be a potential thing that you would want to figure out. And I'd say that's probably good. All right, so our conditional statement, again, is going to start with an if. So we could say something like, if our type is equal to a first-person shooter and our price is less than $50, let's say. All right, then our recommendation might be something like Fortnite, since it's free to play. Okay. All right, else if we have a still first-person shooter, but this time our price is greater than $50, then we might make the recommendation Call of Duty, because those games are ridiculously priced. Okay? So that could be it, right? Then we'd have more else ifs. I think I was reversing these in all of my previous examples. I think I said if else. You get what I mean, okay? So else if, right, type is, let's say, like a Metroidvania. Can't read my handwriting there very well. All right, and our price is greater than 50, and multiplayer. Okay, multiplayer is equal to no. Then our recommendation is going to be Hollow Knight. Okay. And then we'd have a lot more tiers with else ifs, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So that's kind of what this is going to look like. If you can read any of that, it's probably not. That's okay. All right. Next example. We're just going to move through them really quick. All right, so let's say our fourth question now is, what kind of ice cream should I get? All right, for variables for this, I would say one variable would be base flavor, right? Because if I want my base to be chocolate, that's going to give me different options than if I want a vanilla ice cream base. I could also say I want the base flavor of my ice cream to be sherbet, right? So I'm going to get like that citrusy, fruity recommendation rather than anything chocolate or vanilla based. I might also say what is the texture I'm looking for, right? Because sometimes there's crunchy bits in ice cream, sometimes there's chewy bits in ice cream, or sometimes you just want it to be smooth, melt in your mouth ice cream. Okay, so what kind of texture are we looking at? And then I would also say size could be a factor here, right? Because I can get a gallon of ice cream, I can get a pint of ice cream, or I can just get a scoop of ice cream. So size is going to make a difference on what I'm going to recommend to you. All right. So I might do something like, if I was going to put a size variable in there, I might make it be like in ounces, right? So if I wanted like 2 ounces of ice cream, it's going to be like, just get 1 scoop. But if I want 64 ounces of ice cream, it's going to be like, you got to get a whole gallon of ice cream because you're going to eat that in one sitting. All right, so that's what we would be looking at there. Okay, your conditional is going to look just like what we've been looking at, right? If our base flavor is equal to chocolate, for instance, and texture is equal to smooth, and price, or sorry, not price, size is equal to 2, then our rec for something like that might be to get a plain chocolate scoop, right? Whereas, or is it else if? Ooh. Which way do we go? I don't know. Right? If our base flavor is equal to vanilla and our texture is equal to crunchy. My handwriting gets a lot worse as I get quicker and quicker. All right, and our size is equal to 64. Then our recommendation might be to get a gallon of Rocky Road. Something like that. All right, then we're going to have lots more else ifs or if else's. Can't remember the syntax there. All right, over and over and over again until we get to, again, we might have a last here that our recommendation is like, sorry, don't know, because you selected some weird options, so we don't have a recommendation for you, right? It's always good to have that as an option, just in case, like, nothing fits. Okay, so last final example here that we're going to go through real quick is what book should I read? With my wonderful handwriting here. Okay, so what book should I read is going to be my question. The variables that I might want to consider, I would say, what genre are we looking for, right? Am I looking for horror, or am I looking for fantasy, or am I looking for realistic fiction? So specify the genre. I would also be interested in what your age is for this question, right? Because obviously if you're looking for a horror book to read, my recommendation for an adult is going to look much, much different than my recommendation for a child. So that's something that we need to consider, is the age. And then finally, another variable that I would consider for this one would be page count. Right, so maybe I'm not a super strong reader and I'm just looking for a quick read. I might want to lower page count. Or maybe I'm like, I just want to read forever and ever. I need a book that's like over 1,000 pages, right? Page count could be a potential factor in that. So we would have a conditional statement that would look something like, if genre, but this one's a good example. This is why I wanted to show this one. So I would say something like, if my genre was equal to horror, or using an or statement this time. So if my genre is equal to horror, or my genre is equal to, let's say, mystery and crime, Okay. And then let's say my age is less than or equal to 7. Okay, so if I'm looking for a horror or mystery and crime novel and my age is less than 7, then my recommendation might be like a Goosebumps book. All right, this is why I wanted to do this example, because like in my school library, we have 10 different genre categories. So we have like adventure, comedy, fantasy, graphic novels, horror, mystery and crime, sci-fi, etc., etc. So rather than having like what would end up being 87,000 tiers to this conditional statement to cover all of these possible options, I can combine these statements with an or, because Goosebumps kind of falls into both of these categories depending on the book. Some of them might be more horror, focused, but some of them might actually be about solving some kind of mystery. So those kind of categories can go together a little bit. I also look at like realistic fiction and historical fiction can kind of sometimes be combined into a category, because oftentimes historical fiction is essentially realistic fiction. It's just set in the past. So that's, however you'd want to handle it. This would be another good one, for like, I'm looking for age ranges, right? So like, if I'm looking for my age is less than or equal to 7, that's going to be lower elementary students. Well, if I'm going to say, if I'm looking for, it's an if else, an if else, I might be looking for recommendations for middle schoolers, right? So then I might have to have a statement that includes an or an and, potentially for age. So I could do something like my age is greater than or equal to 7. Or sorry, I said middle schoolers. So let's say my age is greater than or equal to 10. And my age is less than or equal to, let's say 14, because that's really about the last age for middle school. Okay, so this would be looking for kids who were older than 10 but younger than 14 to put them in that middle grades category there, all right? And I might do the same thing like if I'm focusing on a recommendation for a high school student. It might be like my age is greater than 14, but also less than or equal to 18 because, high school students are more mature than elementary and middle school students, but they're still not quite adults. So I probably wouldn't give the same recommendation to a teenager as I would a full adult. So it's just one of those things you kind of have to consider. So this actually, what book should I read, is going to be the topic that I focus on for the next 2 parts of this video, where we will be doing the designing and the coding. So that's the end of this one. This one was only about planning for this decision maker project. So hopefully this helped you at least a little bit. I know I kind of flew through those last few examples, just trying to get through it, but hopefully this helps you a little bit with your planning, to the point where you know that you at least need to recognize what variables you're going to need, and what your potential outputs are going to be, before you start coding this app, because you're not going to be able to design a user interface that works unless you have some kind of idea of what those variables are and what those potential outputs are going to be. All right, so I'm going to focus on this question: what book should I read, for the app that I actually code out for you, in the next 2 videos in this series. So I'll see you guys then.